Coming up on this Thursday edition of Newsline at noon, backing down from its earlier stance, North Korea agrees to South Korea's proposal to discuss resuming inter-Korean family reunions at the Panmumjeom truce village on Friday. But Pyongyang wants early talks for resuming their joint tourism project as well. World powers at the United Nations are divided over who is to blame for the latest allegation that chemical attacks in Syria killed hundreds of people. The rebels point the finger at government forces, but the Assad regime flatly denies involvement. Plus, newly released minutes of the Fed's July meeting shows there's a growing consensus. The Fed should start winding down its bond-buying stimulus program in the coming months, but the absence of a clear timeline only added to market confusion. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
Where's the best place for bibimbap?
Les Jeux Olympiques d'hiver se dérouleront-ils à Pyeongchang?
هل أنتم حقاً سابع أكبر مصدر في العالم؟
この歌手は誰ですか？你好，最近哪部电视剧的人气最旺？
Korea is attracting interest from around the world. The more you know, the more you want to know. Dynamic Korea.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at noon. I'm Choi Yusan here in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. We kick things off this afternoon with a fresh sign of warming inter-Korean relations after days of butting heads over the venue of where to hold talks on resuming reunions for families separated since the Korean War. North Korea has agreed to meet at the South Korean side of the truce village of Panmumjeom on Friday.
As for Seoul's suggestion not to rush through talks on a suspended tourism project, Pyongyang said it wants talks to begin as early as the end of this month. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee has the details.
North Korea has accepted South Korea's offer to meet at Panmunjeom on Friday to discuss ways to resume reunions for families separated since the Korean War. The two had been at odds over the venue for days, with the North pushing to hold the talks at its Mount Kumgang resort, while the South wanting to meet at the South Korean side of Panmunjeom. An official from Seoul's Unification Ministry said Thursday that the North notified its change in stance through the Inter-Korean hotline and made a counter-proposal on South Korea's offer to discuss the issue of reopening the Mount Kumgang tourism resort at the end of next month. South Korea suggested earlier this week to hold separate talks on September 25th on reopening the resort to South Korean tourists. The North said the issue cannot wait that long and proposed to meet at the end of this month or the beginning of September. Initially, Pyongyang wanted to hold the talks this week before the Koreas meet for discussions on family reunions. South Korean tours to the Mount Kumgang resort came to an abrupt end in 2008 after a South Korean tourist was shot dead by a North Korean guard. The Unification Ministry said it will have to thoroughly review North Korea's latest proposal before giving an answer. For now, the ministry said the focus is on holding a successful round of reunions for divided families sometime around the Chuseok, or Korean Thanksgiving holiday, next month. Thousands of Korean families were left separated during the Korean War in the 1950s, and the Unification Ministry says more than 80% of the 73,000 registered separated family members in the South are over the age of 70. The ministry said the possibility is open for the reunions to take place at the Mount Kumgang resort as it did in the past, but made clear that even if it does, family reunions and Mount Kumgang tours will be dealt with as two separate issues. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Moving on to the latest in international efforts to end Pyongyang's nuclear programs. Chinese Defense Minister Chang Wan-chuan reportedly urged the U.S. to resume dialogue with North Korea during talks with his U.S. counterpart in Washington earlier this week. According to a briefing by the Chinese Defense Ministry Wednesday, Chang told National Security Advisor Susan Rice that Pyongyang is willing to hold 3- or 4-party talks to discuss its nuclear program. Saying this is the way to peacefully resolve the North Korean nuclear issue, the Chinese defense chief urged Washington to seize the opportunity. However, Washington reportedly said Pyongyang lacks sincerity towards denuclearization and that it must first take meaningful steps in order for the two sides to open dialogue. The third round of military negotiations between South Korea and the U.S. got underway this Thursday over how the two countries will divide the cost for keeping U.S. troops here on the Korean Peninsula. Over the next 2 days, the two allies will try to narrow their differences on how much of the cost Seoul should contribute starting next year. Korea will also demand revising the cost-sharing system in order to prevent the money from being spent for other purposes, such as relocating the U.S. Army base. A government official in Seoul said Korea will likely suggest creating regulations that will force the two countries to initially agree upon where the money can be used. 16 years after being sentenced, former Korean President Roh Tae-woo will finally complete his payment of hundreds of millions of dollars to the country. Roh, a former president of Korea from 1988 to 1993, was sentenced to 17 years in prison and slapped with a fine worth of about $230 million in 1997 on charges of bribery and treason for the role he played in the 1979 military coup and the following Gwangju massacre in 1980. Roh, who was pardoned from his prison term, has paid some $210 million so far, and some $20 million were left unpaid. The in-laws of the former president's son and Roh's brother Jae-woo both have agreed to share the unpaid fine by early September at the latest. The 81-year-old former president has insisted the two shoulder the fine, saying that he had entrusted his slush funds with the two worth some dozens of millions of dollars during the early 1990s.
Opposition forces in Syria have accused the government of ordering a massive chemical weapons attack that killed up to 1,400 people, including many women and children. The UN Security Council convened an emergency meeting Wednesday calling for clarity on the latest incident. We must warn you that there are highly disturbing images throughout this report by Connie Lee.
Videos uploaded onto social media sites show people choking and gagging, and rows of bodies laid out after an apparent chemical weapons attack by Syrian government forces. Opposition fighters accuse President Bashar al-Assad's regime of attacking hundreds of people with chemicals near Damascus on Wednesday. Rebels and medics say the death toll could be as high as 1,400, and the numbers are likely to rise, with hundreds more critically wounded all around the area. The UN Security Council held a 2-hour closed-door emergency session on Wednesday, where the council president said there were strong concerns over what really happened. Earlier, spokesperson for UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon stated that the UN chief was shocked with the latest allegations.
The Secretary-General reiterates that any use of chemical weapons by any side under any circumstances would violate international law.
The Syrian government admitted to carrying out military operations in that area, but denies any use of chemical arms, saying the allegations were illogical and fabricated.
The general leadership of the army confirms these allegations are completely false and are part of the dirty media war that is led by some countries through the media against Syria.
UN inspectors are currently in Damascus investigating previous allegations of chemical weapons use. And following these latest claims, the White House is calling for unrestricted access to all sites in Syria to thoroughly investigate the alleged use of chemical weapons there. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Now, moving on to the latest in Egypt, the military-backed government has ordered former President Hosni Mubarak to be transferred from prison to house arrest after a ruling determined he could no longer be imprisoned legally. The international community continues to condemn the recent killings in Egypt, with the EU agreeing to impose an arms embargo on the country. Our Kim Min-ji has the details.
Egypt's Prime Minister Hassan el-Bablawi ordered late Wednesday that the former President Hosni Mubarak be placed under house arrest after he is released from prison. The announcement comes days after a court ruling said the former president can no longer be kept behind bars legally. Officials say that the transfer could take place as early as Thursday. The 85-year-old who led Egypt for 3 decades has spent 17 months in prison. The release of the ex-leader comes at a time of ongoing instability in Egypt, following a brutal crackdown on protesters and the arrest of senior members of the Muslim Brotherhood. More than 900 people, including civilians, have been killed over the past week. The turmoil in Egypt has also deeply alarmed the international community. The European Union agreed Wednesday to suspend the export of arms and security equipment to Egypt due to the mounting violence in the country. However, the bloc will continue economic assistance, as a cutback on aid would hurt Egyptian people more than it would the government. Meanwhile, the violence has also prompted Washington to take a harder stance on Egypt, and it is also reviewing whether its aid program should be suspended. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
But that is why we are calling
for your fill of Korean and international news. Join Chae Yu-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. Newsline at noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
Investors had been hoping for some strong hint about when the U.S. Federal Reserve was planning to start reining in its monetary easing program, but unfortunately for them, the Fed's Open Market Committee was not forthcoming. Our Yu-Lian has more.
The Federal Reserve has offered few hints on its timeline for tapering off its massive monetary stimulus program. The minutes of the July 30th to 31st meeting released on Wednesday showed most of the 12 members on the Federal Open Market Committee agreed that a change to the stimulus was not yet appropriate. Investors have been eager to find out when the Fed will start winding down its $85 billion in monthly asset purchases. Many expect it will begin September. While the details of the minutes provided few clues as to when it will begin, it did little to dissuade expectations.
Consensus among officials is that the economy is going to improve in the second half of this year as fiscal restraint wanes, consumer confidence has risen, and employment gains have moved to about a 200,000 average, what they're expecting to see, with confidence that it's going to continue going forward. So that is consistent with their view that they should dial back a bit on the near-term stimulus.
The uncertainty about the Fed's intentions has rocked global markets over the past few months, especially when Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke announced in June plans to start scaling back the quantitative easing measures later this year and end it completely by mid-2014. After the release of the minutes, market movement reflected the uncertainty, with major indexes fluctuating in the final hours of trading. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 0.7%, while the S&P 500 fell 0.6% on Wednesday. The Fed will meet again on September 17th for a 2-day meeting, which will be followed by a press conference by Bernanke. Yu-Lian, Arirang News.
U.S. soldier Bradley Manning has been sentenced to 35 years in prison for releasing hundreds of thousands of classified military documents to the WikiLeaks website. A military judge also ruled the 25-year-old be dishonorably discharged from the military. Manning's supporters gathered outside the Fort Meade courtroom on Wednesday and shouted that they will continue to fight for him. Manning was arrested in May of 2010 and was convicted last month on 20 accounts, including espionage and theft, but was acquitted of the most serious charge of aiding the enemy. His 35-year sentence is less than the 60 years prosecutors had asked for.
The operator of Japan's crippled nuclear power plant has admitted the highly radioactive water leaking from a tank at Fukushima is thought to have seeped into the Pacific Ocean. In a statement Wednesday, TEPCO said about half of the 300 tons of leaked contaminated water was absorbed into the ground, but that 6 millisieverts per hour of radiation was measured inside a nearby drain, meaning some water likely drained into the sea. The country's nuclear agency went further to raise concerns that more tanks at the plant may be letting out radioactive water after they were built hastily after the 2011 disaster. Earlier, the agency said it would bump up the level of crisis 2 notches to 3 on an international scale for radiological releases. The International Atomic Energy Agency is observing the current crisis seriously and has offered to help when needed. What has been dubbed China's trial of the century is now underway, in which disgraced politician Bo Xilai faces charges of bribery, corruption and abuse of power. The once rising political star is expected to go through a swift trial where many believe he will almost certainly be found guilty. Sources say Bo could face life in prison, but during the trial he's likely to plead not guilty to charges of abuse of power and instead portray himself as a victim of a power struggle. Charges against the former party chief of Chongqing City also include financial transgressions from earlier in his career. Bo's life was turned upside down last year after his wife was found guilty for the murder of British businessman Neil Hayward.
Over 1 billion people have a Facebook account, and more than half of them log on to the site every day to check up on what their friends have been up to. But a new study says the more people use Facebook, the worse they actually feel. Our Son Jung-in tells us why.
Researchers from the University of Michigan recruited 82 young adults to find out whether using Facebook influences people's feelings and satisfaction with life. For 2 weeks, participants answered a number of questionnaires about their emotions and worries 5 times a day to rate their well-being. After the study, researchers concluded people who used Facebook felt less happy than those who didn't. However, those who talked to a friend directly over the phone or had human contact face-to-face felt happier. The lead researcher on the project said the findings show how people's mood fluctuates depending on their Facebook usage because of their feelings of jealousy and resentment when they see photos of fabulous vacations, expensive purchases, and adorable children. And this is not the first time a study has proven this phenomenon. Researchers in Sweden studied over 1,000 people and found users who spend more time on Facebook have lower self-esteem. So next time, instead of liking someone's status update, why not tell them you like them in person? Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
Korea's multi-purpose satellite, the Arirang 5, is scheduled to be launched tonight, slightly before midnight Korea time. This latest version has a special radar that's capable of observing the Earth's surface no matter the time of the day or the weather conditions. Song Ji-san has the details.
Arirang 5, South Korea's multi-purpose satellite, also known as COMSAT-5, is set to blast off at 8:39 p.m. Thursday night local time from Russia's Yasny launch site, located some 1,800 kilometers southeast of Moscow. The most notable feature of this latest satellite is its SAR, short for synthetic aperture radar, that can observe and photograph the Earth's surface at any time, regardless of weather conditions. Once deployed, the satellite will orbit the Earth at an average altitude of 550 kilometers, monitoring the ocean, the environment, and natural disasters, along with its predecessors, the Arirang 2 and 3 satellites. But the Arirang 5 has a leg up on those that came before it. The previous models aren't able to capture images when it's cloudy or dark, but Arirang 5's SAR makes that possible, meaning scientists will gain access to data that they haven't had before. Arirang 5 will provide high-resolution images as precise as 1 meter resolution. About 15 minutes after takeoff, the satellite will detach from its carrier, and engineers on the ground are expected to make first contact with Arirang 5 6 hours later. From then on, the satellite will be on duty 24 hours a day for the next 5 years, observing and sending data from its orbit. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Korean fishery researchers have successfully achieved mass production of a butterfish breed, which may enable scientists to move a step closer to complete farming. Scientists at a national breed research center were able to produce baby fish in large quantities with fertilized eggs from butterfish. They said 80% of the 3 million fertilized eggs were hatched, and of those, 5,000 have survived and are growing well. This is the first time the experiment was successful since they started research in 2011. Experts anticipate this achievement could serve as the foundation for future mass production of butterfish in Korea. A group of Japanese companies has pledged to invest in Korea's largest man-made island in Ansan City. The landmark project on Lake Shihwa is expected to become a regional symbol and an engine for the local economy. Paul Lee reports.
Here in Ansan City on Korea's western coast, the Panmumjeom project is beginning to take shape across Lake Shihwa. Translated as Halfmoon Island, the massive development project plans to build various facilities such as a convention center and marina complex. The artificial island will span across 170,000 square meters and is set to be completed in 2019 at a cost of nearly $1.1 billion.
Korean companies will be able to utilize the space at Lake Shihwa in connection with marine and leisure tourism. I believe it will truly help the local economy and create jobs.
The commercial project is gaining further momentum with considerable interest from foreign investors. Representatives from 15 Japanese companies have come to Korea to pledge some $313 million in funding. Investors say their proximity to Incheon International Airport and the area's high growth potential were key factors in their decision to do business here.
First, we saw that the environment was great, but above else, the surrounding market is good, and therefore a decision was made to invest here.
The site hopes to become a landmark of Ansan as new hotel resorts and recreational facilities give local businesses an economic boost, while providing a brighter future for the city and its people. Paul Yi, Arirang News.
Time now to get a weather update with our weathercaster Lee Ji-yeon standing by at the Weather Center here at Arirang. Good afternoon to you, Ji-yeon.
Well, hello there, guys. Now, tomorrow is Cheoseol according to the solar seasoning divisions, and it indicates the changing of temperature. Cheo means stop and Seo means summer, so Cheoseol signals that the hot summer is ending.
Well, we got a little bit of a Korean language lesson there too, but it's amazing how the term goes exactly with the weather, isn't it, really? Because, Ji-yeon, you actually promised things will start to cool off tomorrow.
That's right. Well, things will be cooling down from tonight with the rain clouds moving into the nation, while this afternoon will be pretty hot, but it shouldn't be as hot as yesterday because yesterday we saw record-breaking temperature for this summer in Seoul at 33.9 degrees Celsius. So the rain clouds will be moving in tonight, and it's going to bring some much-needed rain to most of the peninsula. The amount of precipitation should quench the thirst from this drought. In the areas like Jeju, which will see 10 to 50 millimeters of rain, while the rest of the peninsula can expect to about 30 to 70 millimeters. While the most of the rain should let up by Friday in the central region, but southern provinces can expect to receive this rain until Saturday afternoon. And this rain, after it goes away, will definitely be getting away from the summer heat. But right now, we are looking at clear skies with few clouds passing by, but towards the midday, we're definitely gonna see more clouds coming in. And today should be the last day of the extreme heat wave, so let's take a look at those numbers. Now, the afternoon highs will be looking pretty scorching as Busan, Seoul, Daegu, and Gwangju will be hiking up from 31 to 34 degrees respectively. Moving over on the other places, it looks like Jeju and Daejeon will soar to 34, while Dokdo and Mount Gyeongang will be topping out at 29 and 27. Now we're on the last stretch of this heat wave, so hang in there, guys. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for viewers around the world. That's all for me today. Enjoy your lunch break and have a wonderful rest of the day. Now back to you guys in the studio.
Thank you very much, Jiyeon. Enjoy your lunch too. And those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Thank you for joining us on this Thursday here in Seoul, and we'll be back at the same time tomorrow at noon.